Okay, Lou, is everybody in? Okay. Welcome everybody to the October, can we believe it's October, meeting of the Northeast Philadelphia History Network. And we have a very interesting topic. As I told the speaker, I've been thinking about Thomas Holme since I was a little girl because I grew up on Ashton Road and we ran around Holmes Circle. And my mother used to always tell me there was this guy, Thomas Holme, who was a surveyor. So it was probably one of the first historical memories I have is about Thomas Holme. So I'm happy that we have somebody to talk about him today. You can't hear me? I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I really think I had it close to my mouth. Okay, well, welcome everybody. So we have an interesting topic tonight, Thomas Holme. And before we get to that, by the way, I'm Maureen McDevitt Green. I'm the president of the Friends of Philadelphia History Network. No, that's wrong. Friends of Northeast Philadelphia History. I knew there was an N in there. It's new. I haven't quite gotten the hang of it yet. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to introduce the previous president who has interesting information to give us today. So I would like to introduce Jack, who will definitely hold the microphone closer to his mouth.
Thank you, Maureen. Yeah, I used to be the president of this organization, and I rotated off the board in order to manage a really cool project that we, for the Preservation Alliance of Greater Philadelphia, and it was just announced last week that we received a $230,000 grant from the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage for this project. And it's just about to start. Hasn't really started officially yet, but it's called Poquessing Trail of History, the land, the people, the stories. And what we're going to do is there's these historic sites along the Poquessing Creek in far northeast Philadelphia, and a couple of sites and a couple of potential sites, historic sites that we're going to sort of activate with signage and trail markers and public programs and all kinds of activities. So we're going to build a representation of the Benjamin Rush house, the house that he was born in. The house dates from 1690 and was demolished in 1969, but the stones were preserved. So we're going to try to use the stones to recreate, do a representation of that house in Benjamin Rush State Park. And then there's an African-American burial ground in Byberry. Many of you have heard about it. It's long abandoned, but was created by the Byberry Friends meeting in 1780. We're going to rehabilitate and honor that. That's right on the edge of the state park. We're going to help to renovate the interior of Byberry Hall, built in 1846 by the great Black abolitionist Robert Purvis. We're going to activate that as a community history center. And then we're going to build a memorial to the original inhabitants of the area, the Lenni Lenape, the natives, Native Americans. So these are 4 sites that we're going to all revive or recreate and then build public programming around. It's a two-year project, again, funded by the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage. And there are a number of partner organizations. Preservation Alliance of Greater Philadelphia is the fiscal sponsor of the project, but it's in partnership with the Friends of Northeast Philadelphia History, Byberry Quaker Meeting, the Friends of Poquessing Creek Watershed, the Society for the Preservation of Philadelphia African American Assets, and the Delaware Tribe of Indians, which is the federally recognized descendants of the Lenni Lenape. So it's a really exciting project, and it's just about to get started. So I'll have more about it as it builds out and moves along. But I just wanted to officially announce it now because it was officially announced last week by the Pew Center. Anybody have any questions about it? No. Yeah, Dan. Parkwood. It's a potter's field. So yeah. So he was asking about there's a Potter's Field Cemetery on Dunksbury Road in Parkwood. It's if you know that area, there's a playground there. It's just a little down the street from that. It's just basically an open field, and it's actually part of it's used for soccer and sports. But for years, it was a pauper's Potter's Field where the city buried unidentified people. The boy in the box was buried there for many years until he was unearthed and moved. So it's still there. There's still bodies there, and they just recently, the medical examiner's office was exhuming bodies because they have some new technology now that they think they may be able to identify some previously unknown people buried there. So they've exhumed some bodies like last week or something. Yeah, it's a Potter's Field. I think it's been there since the 50s or 60s or something. So, okay. Lastly, I have a sign-in sheet. Just so again, the way we stay in touch with all these meetings is through email or through our Facebook page. So please sign in so we know you're here. If we don't have your email address, please put it on there, or follow us on our Facebook page, the Northeast Philadelphia Network Facebook page, and that's how we announce all these meetings and activities. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Fred Moore, the treasurer of the Friends of Northeast Philadelphia History, and he will introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Jack. Nice crowd. How many people are here for the first time? Good. We have about 50 or maybe 40 people here and about 40, I think, on Zoom, almost 50. So Jim Shomper and I go back about 40 years. I didn't realize he was a surveyor at that time. Our sons were in Boy Scouts together. So I knew Jim then. But then around 2012, we got a marker for the bridge, the Frankfurt Avenue Bridge over Pennypack Creek. And Jim was a big part of that with his surveying stuff. And that's when I realized what a accomplished surveyor he has been. He's retired now. And Jim, let's get your microphone working and we'll see if we can hear you.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. It's working.
Okay, it's working. Hope everyone out there can hear us and hear Jim. He's the important one. So Jim Shomper, retired surveyor with Philadelphia and New Jersey, or Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
Pennsylvania, New Jersey.
Yeah. And then I find out, well, he lives probably about where Thomas Holme lived. We don't know where Thomas Holme lived, but we do know where Jim Shomper lived. All right, Jim, go for it.
Thank you, Fred. Oh, wow. That's loud. Okay. Like Fred said, I'm not a professional speaker. I'm a retired surveyor and an amateur historian. I just always fascinated me. And I believe, I do live definitely on part of the plantation that was Wellspring, Thomas Holme's plantation. And he's buried, his cemetery is less than a quarter mile from my house. So we are on the ground, and there are a number of people that we figured out that his house had to be somewhere near where Pennypack Street and Crispin Street intersect. There's an old foundation that is now part of the Pennypack Home Ownership Association's maintenance department that when I was a young boy, I remember was a stone wall foundation. That's probably his barn. But anyhow, there was no proof. I'm going to talk tonight about Thomas Holme, the first Surveyor General. And I'm going to try to talk more about what he did before he got here, before he became to Pennsylvania. Everybody knows what he did after that. He built Philadelphia. And so we have why didn't it? Oh, there you go. He's the oldest of three children. George and Alice Holme was born in Lancashire, England. So he had two brothers and sisters, two brothers. I don't know. It just said the oldest of three. He was born November 1st, 1624. We're coming up on the 400th anniversary of his birthday. He was baptized on November 3rd. This is a picture I got on the internet of Upper Lancashire. So it's a pretty neat looking little area. You know, this is a current day, I guess, but it probably didn't look much different when he was a youth. He was born of a yeoman. Thomas was described as a yeoman. What is a yeoman? You hear it all the time. The Navy has a rank of a yeoman or a job title of a yeoman, and that's a clerk. So why do you, I've heard of yeoman farmers, but what was it, just a plain yeoman? It turns out if you owned land and you made money either above over what you needed to live, you were a yeoman, the minor businessman, the beginning of the capitalism system, the middle class. So Thomas Holme was a yeoman, his father was. This is a picture of a grammar school. For the first, you know, he was a kid, he was a normal kid, he grew up in there, went to normal 6 years like any other kid, went to school. When he got a little bit more further along, he went to the grammar school. Now, this is a picture of Hawkshead Grammar School. This is the town his parents lived in. And you look on the plaque right here, when you zoom in on the picture, it says founded 1588. So that's the building he went to. 400 years later, it's still there. And this is an interior shot. It's now a museum of a grade school from that time. It's amazing what you find from 400 years ago. Until he was 17, he lived a normal life in the community. And they figure he probably enlisted in the army, in the parliamentary army, to avoid most of the people of his group did. You had the Catholics. It was more of a religious war than anything. The Catholics and the Anglicans supported the king. The others supported parliament. And in order to keep from being drafted into the army he didn't want to go into, most of the Lancashire people enlisted in the parliamentary army, who later was taken over by Cromwell. Cromwell's army, or his cavalry, was made up of mostly Lancashire men, and he was probably one of them. In September of 1649, Thomas goes to Cromwell when he invaded Ireland. And with him, he took his bride of a month. He'd gotten married to Sarah and had took her with him. So can you imagine, newlywed, a month, and you're going to follow in the army? But I guess that's what women did. This is a picture of English reenactors of the English Civil War. This is what the cavalry looked like. Obviously, cameras weren't around then. They were known as Roundheads because of the helmets. A lot of people started calling them round. It was a derogatory term. Oh, you're a roundhead. This is a leather jacket like they would wear as opposed to armor. They were on horses. In 1653, after the fighting stopped, he was still in the military. He was paid money for restoring this core castle. Now, what you see is a picture. This is a computer-generated image. This is a photograph of what's there. And I would imagine this is the part that he worked on back in 53. So he was paid 70 pounds for doing that. Then they came up with an idea to compensate the soldiers from the Civil War that they couldn't pay. They were going to take all the defeated Irish, ship them out, take over their land, take over their farms, and give it to the soldiers as payment. And in order to do that, they had to first figure out what they had. So they had to do these surveys. They called it, the first one they did was a civil survey. And what they did was they went around and they talked to people and they said, well, where's the boundaries? And they showed them where the boundaries were. And they asked people who owned this, who owned that. And they made it, it was all done what they call by inquisition, but it was all writing down as much information as they knew of the different baronies and the different town lots and the different stuff. And of course, the people were hostile. You know, if you own land, you're not telling people what somebody's going to take it from you. You didn't really like it, but they had to do that. It was a lot of work. Thomas Holme in 1654 was commissioned to conduct a civil survey of the county Kerry. So he was commissioned to do a survey of the whole county. So he had to go in there, and I'm sure he had helpers, but they had to interview people. They had to determine where the boundaries were for the individual owners who had the interest in that. And this is after the war, and like I said, people were not very happy. To facilitate the redistribution, after they had all this basic information, they had to have a real honest-to-God survey. And it's known as the Down Survey. The reason they call it the Down Survey is because they took a surveyor's chain and laid it down and measured with it. I have here a surveyor's chain, very similar to what they would have had then. This is not 400 years old. This is only from about 1790. So, but this is a surveyor's chain. This one's 33 feet long. I'll pass it around. You can look at it. Don't drop it on your feet. That's a half of a chain. If you want, you can try to stretch it out amongst you all. But that's why it's called the Down Survey. They laid the chain down and physically measured the land. You want to stretch it out, Fred? No. It's kind of like measuring something 6 foot at a time with a wooden ruler, but that's 33 feet. It's 2 poles. Okay, the survey involved about 1,000 men to do this survey. And they're doing all of Ireland, remember. They're not just doing a little bit. They're doing the entire country of Ireland, except for the one county that they evacuated all the Irish to. That own land. The regular Irish, the poor Irish, they kept. It was the landowners they got rid of. Instead of using skilled surveyors, they did the mapping project with the unemployed and cheap soldiers. You're a soldier, you're going to get land, well, you're going to work for it, you're going to do a survey for us, and you're out there measuring. They trained them how to do what they had to do, but they didn't train them in everything, because, you know, surveying at that time was a very learned profession. You'd served apprenticeships, you'd spend time. Well, they didn't have time to do that, so they trained certain surveyors how to measure with a chain. They trained other surveyors how to take bearings and establish stuff with a compass and directions. They trained surveyors, surveyors how to draft it up. So they had a lot of men doing specific little jobs. And then they had others who put it all together, and people that knew what they were doing, they were the ones that finally did the checking and the final drawings. Now, this is a county, Wexford, and the reason I brought that up is this is where Thomas winds up. The names of the people that did the work, they're not recorded, but you know, there was 1,000 of them. It's only logical to figure that Thomas moved on from doing a civil survey. That means he was at least a little more qualified than the basic soldier. So it's assumed that he was probably one of the cartographers because of what he did later in life. This is the entire county of Wexford. And in November of 1656, 6 days after he turned 39 years old, the lots for his regiment were drawn. That's how they assigned the land. They drew the lots, and you got certain properties depending on what you had. Thomas wound up acquiring more than 4,000 acres of land. Now, it wasn't all one lump. There was a piece here, a piece there. His biggest piece was 800 and some acres. And it was in this area in here. When I had the map on the computer, I could zoom in, and the town name that he lived in was in this area here. So and it had an income, a rental income, because he was a landlord. 15 pounds, 15 shillings, and 5.5 pence a year. I think it's an annual rent. So he had money coming in just from the land rentals. And as you can see, imagine he was probably very popular with the Irish that were displaced. Sometime between 1654 and 1655, Thomas and Sarah became members of the Society of Friends. After the Civil War, and after the English Civil War, there was a lot of dissension. A lot of the people that supported Parliament, the soldiers especially, who thought that their life was going to be better without the king, they didn't think they had much better hope than they had under the king. So they were rebelling, and there's different movements, there's different religious factions that are joining and popping up, some more than others. And that's when the Quakers, or the Society of Friends, first comes around, out of this satisfaction of the English Civil War. Finally, in 1656, he's discharged from the army. He's out of the army now. So from the time he was 17 until then, he was a soldier. You're talking 15 years or more of whatever rank. Thomas and Sarah moved, they were in Limerick. Well, it's the other side of Ireland. And they opened their houses for meetings of the Society of Friends. Because this was an unpopular religion, and it was, you know, it was growing, but they were being persecuted. At one of the meetings, the house door was driven in, soldiers came in, and they arrested the one guy, took him to jail, James Sycamore, and the house was ransacked, books and papers were taken. And it was just terrorizing. Can you imagine the young kids living in the house? Because they did have young children, and all of a sudden these soldiers come in. This is also in the period when the cities were all walled. You didn't have open cities, they were walled cities. One of the incidences, okay, I'm jumping ahead. Thomas Lowe was a preacher or a speaker for the Society of Friends. He was second only to the founder, George Fox. And when he toured Ireland, Thomas Holme, there's just evidence that Thomas Holme traveled with him and preached with him and organized with him. And in one of the times, a restored later, Admiral William Penn, he invited these traveling people. He figured, oh, it'd be a hoot. Let's have them come to our place and lecture for entertainment. The people who were there with Admiral Penn's were moved to tears by the group. This is a story that was related numerous times by other people. They moved to tears by his speech. And among the audience was the Admiral's 13-year-old son, William. Is this the first time William Penn and Thomas Holme meet? Probably. And I understand it's a story that was told by both of them for many years. This is Wexford jail, Ghoul. And the reason, that's a picture, modern picture, obviously, that's not old, a rain barrel. But this is the jail in Wexford. And in 1662, Sarah was incarcerated in the Wexford prison for her activities as a Quaker. She was arrested for going to Wexford to visit her husband, who was already in that jail, and other Quakers. Also, among them was Thomas and Mary Lowe, the people he had toured with. So the Quakers were being persecuted just for being Quakers. They were being locked up. Their meetings were being raided. They were being harassed. Three events, it's messing up my thing. It happened in 1660. Three events for the Irish Quakers were pretty important. This is George Fox, the founder of the Quaker movement of Society of Friends. The founder of the Society of Friends, George Fox, he visited most of the meetings in Ireland. He traveled through Ireland, visiting the meetings. Thomas Holme and people from Dublin went with him. They escorted him. They traveled with him. So that was a pretty big to-do. Another thing that happened that was important was an indenture or a recording of a deed or an agreement where William May, a carpenter of Dublin, he and 9 other people, including Thomas, they reach an agreement and they rent or lease a piece of ground in Dublin. And on that piece of ground, the society builds their first Friends Meeting House in Dublin. And it's on Bride Alley and Bride Street in Dublin. I don't know if it's still there. I looked there, and all I could see was it looked like it was a church of some sort. Now, whether it's still a Quaker church, I don't think so. 22-year-old William Penn finally got converted to being a Quaker. He joins in their activities in Ireland. He travels around with them. He gets arrested with them. He goes to meetings with them. He travels with them. He actually spends a year or a winter with a neighbor of Thomas, this guy named Cuppage, Robert Cuppage, who also shows up on the 1687 map of Pennsylvania. So he's one of the people in Ireland that came here. The half-year meeting of friends was at Cuppage's house. Lambstown, where Cuppage lived, is a neighboring town to Bregardy, I think I'm saying it correctly, where Thomas and Sarah lived. During the 1670s, Thomas Holme's house in, correct me if I'm wrong, Brugutin, how would you pronounce that? And Robert Cuppage's house in Lambstown were the center of the Quaker activities. That's where most of the meetings were done and things were happening. In 1672, Thomas and Abram Fuller are authors of a book, and then you got a picture of the title page, and it's a pretty long title. So who knew Thomas Holme was an author? Yeah, I didn't know until I saw this. William Penn was in Ireland acting as a deputy for his father, Admiral Penn, and soon became acquainted with Thomas and a circle of active friends. During the dozen years or so that they were acquainted, they developed a close relationship. So, like I said, William Penn was moving around with the Quakers. Thomas Holme was very active in the Quakers. He was writing books for them. He's going to jail for them. The King's formal declaration and patent for the land of that becomes Pennsylvania was April 12th, 1681. He commissioned his cousin, William Markham, to be the deputy governor. He sent him to the Providence, over here, get over and start organizing a state or a country, colony. In October, he commissioned another cousin, William Crispin, to assist Markham. That's the welcome, the ship that Penn comes over on. Thomas Holme was a trader. He's now grown. He's evidence that he sent shipped things back and forth between England, Barbados, the New England, and here you have the trade routes. Slaves from Africa, well, he wasn't involved in that, but you have sugar, rum, and stuff going from Barbados to England. You've got raw materials coming from Charlestown to Barbados. Barbados was like a crossroads of the trades back and forth across the ocean. And Thomas was involved in that. He was a trader. And probably, they think, he was at Barbados. I think he might have been in Barbados when the ship carrying William Crispin got in after the storm, because they were caught in a storm and they went to Barbados because they didn't make it as far as they were headed to Pennsylvania or to the Delaware River. And William Crispin died in Barbados. So now somebody had to take the news back to William Penn that his surveyor and commissioner that's going to help and found a colony has died. And they think maybe Thomas Holme did it. They think he was in Barbados when that ship happened, when that happened. They believe he did. And in April of 1682, William Penn appointed Thomas Holme to be the surveyor and returned to the province. He was 58. William Penn was in his 30s. 58 years old. Can you imagine trying to pick up and move to a whole new world when you're 58? I mean, I can't imagine doing it. And all the people he was involved with were much younger, apparently. They were all Penn's age. There's a picture of good old William Penn. Thomas invested in 5,000 acres of William Penn's province. And he had the money to buy 5,000 acres of land. He participated in the founding of the company, the Pennsylvania Company. And that turned out to be the Free Society of Traders, which owned a big part of Philadelphia. They were like the big Quaker business proposition. And Thomas Holme was one of the 12 members of there. That was there was a group of the leaders of that. 12 of them were elected to be permanent residents in the country, where the rest of the members could be in England, they could be in Ireland, they could be anywhere. But 12 of these people had to stay in Pennsylvania. He was one of them. He set sail in April, took 14 weeks to get here. I don't know why, but it's what it did. The actual date that the ship got to Upland, they don't know.
And it's naturally non-stick. Home cooking, outlet.
Somebody's not here. He brought with him his 5 living children. He had a bunch of kids. We'll see that later. Trial was one of the names of one of his sons, I guess because of all the trials and tribulations he went through. William was the youngest son. Eleanor and Hester were his two of the daughters. And his oldest daughter, Sarah, she remained with her husband in England. She had been married before he left. They were all at least teenagers or older. He also brought with him a whole bunch of goods. Got 600 weight of lead, 1,000 weight of iron, 1,200 needles, 6 small and 2 great saddles, 80 pounds of shoes, a dozen bridles, a half of, I don't know what that word means, of grindstones, a half of chab, 1/2 of 100 pounds of gunpowder, horse collars, and shoes. He's a businessman. He was going to come and set up a store of some sort, or some kind of trading enterprise. He was a member of the Pennsylvania Company. He was a part of the Free Society of Traders. He was a trader. Here's some of his children, or this is all of his children. His first son was born, Thomas Jr., in 1651.
Showing that he is more prepared to move into
His daughter Sarah was born in 1653.
leaders and countries around.
Daughter Esther and another daughter Mary were born, but they both died. Esther was only 4 and Mary was only a few months old when they died. And they're buried in Limerick. Susanna was born in Dungaree. Now, this name Dungaree and Bregarden were used kind of interchangeable in my sources on where he lived. So I'm thinking one might have been the town and one might have been the actual name of the property in Wexford. They went back to England for a little while, where another daughter was born. And then when they moved back to Ireland, a couple of them died. Thomas Jr. died at 17 in 1668. Susanna died at 14 in 1671. Sarah Sr., his wife, passed away in April of 1676. So now he's a widower, and his son Samuel died in 1676 also. So he had, between the two of them, they had 10 kids, and 5 of them lived to adulthood. This is a map. This is a map that would have been available before he got here. This is what he's looking at. Where that red arrow signifies where the Delaware River and the Schuylkill River are. That's what they knew about it. Basically, it's a map of Virginia, but it shows very little features there. Along the river, there was a few Swedish plantations and Dutch, but there wasn't many people living along the river. This is another map. Again, you can see how barren, there's not much information. They don't know what's here. These are the maps that he could have had with him to come. I'm sure he studied whatever he could on the ship over. but he didn't know what he was getting into. That's what he was getting into. Wilderness. And like I said, there were some plantations, there were some habitations along the road, but the majority of where Philadelphia is looked like that, woods. The first people lived in what they call dugouts or caves along the bank of the river. Here's an illustration. You can see they just dug a little bit of a hole in and then took lumber or timber and closed them up a little bit. Daniel Pastorius, the founder of Germantown, he lived in a dugout around where Dock Creek or around Front and Spruce, in that general area in the dugout. And he tells the story of traveling to the area of where 3rd and Chestnut is. He got lost in the woods twice. So, I mean, if anybody's familiar with downtown, from where the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is to 3rd and Chestnut, where the Revolutionary War Museum is, he got lost in the wilderness between them 2 points. You can almost see one from the other today. So, this is the portraiture. Fred's got a really nice one in the back. Almost immediately, Holme, accompanied by the other commissioners, because he wasn't the only one acting for William Penn to sell land, they had to find a place to build the city. William Penn sent them over here, build the city. As soon as the site was chosen, town lots were apportioned and the Liberty lands were surveyed. Now, there's also a story that Thomas Holme favored the area around Pettipat Creek for the city, where the other commissioners picked down where it actually was built. I don't know how much credence that was, but that's why he bought a lot of property up in this area at one time. But he kind of thought that between the Franklin Creek and Pennypack Creek would have been a good spot for the city instead of further south. This is part of the 1687 map, but it shows the Liberty lands. The Liberty lands are, go up here, over here, like that. Oh, my pointer's dying. Along, but the Liberty lands was a way around Penn's promise. It was a compromise. He said, if you bought 5,000 acres, I'll give you a 100-acre city lot. Oh, that's great. You know, people are going to 100 acres in the city, because he wanted the city to be spread out. After the fire in London in the early 1660s, William Penn, he wanted a green country town. How many times have we heard Philadelphia is the green country town? He wanted a big spread it out with big properties for people to have everything they needed in the city, but a lot of space in between so that the fire couldn't travel and whatnot. But it was impractical. The proposed predicted upon a town of 10,000 acres for a town, a city. But it turned out, the portraiture, it turned out to be about 1,200 acres. So there's no way 10,000 and 1,200. So as a compromise, Penn said, I'll give you 10% of whatever you bought in the Liberty lands, and I'll give you a building lot in the city. So now you're getting 3 different pieces of land. You're getting your 2,000 or 3,000 acres out here in the far reaches, or up in Bucks County or down in Chester County, and you're getting 10% of that, or maybe 50 acres in the Liberty lands, which is fairly close, and then you're getting a building lot in the city where you could live, and you could have a country house, and you could have farms. It was a compromise. In the 17th century, surveying manuals and technical books were these. The art of surveying and measuring land made easy. The practical surveyor, or art of land measuring, also made easy. And, you know, just trying to read these are interesting, but this is what the information was. Here's a chapter on laying out new land, specifically in His Majesty's plantations in America. This is, they're talking about coming to the New World. And they're telling you how to lay out 100 acres with a chain. I don't know where my chain got to. It's floating around somewhere. But, how do you do it, And you read, let me get my glasses on so I can read off of here. You take, if you wanted it to be a square, you take the number of acres that's supposed to be, and you add 100 ciphers or 100 zeros. So if you're going to do 100 acres, you add on five ciphers, 5 zeros, and you divide that, and that gives you the number of links in the 100. Oh, okay. Just put it on the table in the back there. Everybody saw it. I'll fix it when I take it home. So, but it's an easy way to do the math because the chain had 100 links. So it's almost a decimal system type thing. You add the 5 zeros, that gives you how many links in 100 acres. And then you divide by the square root of that, it'll give you the sides, the number of chains per side. And then the other one here tells you how to do it if you want a given side. So you want four chains on one side, and then you got the other, you need the other length. You do the same thing. You add the five zeros, you take off the 4 chains, and you can figure out how many chains go down the other side, the long side of your parcel to get a rectangle. But this is the kind of information that the surveyors had to have. Thomas wasn't alone. He was the surveyor general. There were a lot of deputy surveyors, and there was a lot of other surveyors. There's 3 or 4 that you see mentioned all the time as being not doing what they're supposed to. There's a guy from Chester County in Ashcombe, Charles Ashcombe. He was doing surveying. He wasn't returning the plans. He wasn't paying the fees. He was doing a lot of wild things. In fact, he was taken to court a number of times. It was Thomas Fairman was another guy. He was here before Penn. He had property on Shacklemaxon. He was one of the settlers. He also had problems not doing what he was told. But there was probably close to 200 other surveyors that did what they were supposed to. Everybody thinks of the bad guys, but there was a lot of guys that actually did it because it wouldn't have gotten done otherwise. Thomas Holme couldn't have done it all himself. This is a picture of typical surveying work. In England, where you have open fields and open properties, they measured with a pole, a 16.5-foot long stick. That's why they called it a pole. A pole, a perch, or a rod are all the same word. And what they did with that, in order to measure, they would lay it on the ground and they would tip it. Look, where that point was, they wouldn't move it, and they would just flip it, kind of like a whirligig, but end over end. And that was how they measured in poles. But when you're in an open field, you could do that. So then when you're in woods or more, you need a chain, and you need sight poles. In the background here, here's a guy with a pole, here's a guy with a pole, and here's the chain laying out. And that's a little better, and there's reasons you use that. One guy can line the other person up to make sure the line is straight, the poles are straight. If you're measuring towards a tree or a rock or a landmark, the rear chain man, the guy in the back, can line up that this pole is going towards where they want to go. So keep your line chain, because if you start going way off and then come back, you're measuring too long of a line. Here's a typical survey this is from 1717. And it's describing, here you got 102 rods. This is 4 rods and 13 feet, this short line. This is 6 rods or 11 rods and 5 feet. But the interesting thing here they're not bearings. We're used to thinking of bearings of degrees and minutes and even down to seconds. These are not bearings. These are, well, this one's west, but this one up here is north by a half west. North by a half of something. Here's a translation. Starts out at the corner. I don't have to. Starts at the corner of a pile of rocks, corner of a certain person's yard. Then running by the fence, 102 or a heap of stones. I'm sorry. Let me start at the beginning. First corner of the tract is a heap of stones northwest James Oley's house. Then south by west, half a point west, 4 rods, 13 feet to J. Dieter's fence. Thence running by the fence, 102 rods to a heap of stones for a corner. So it's not a bearing, it's west by half a point west. Thence north, half a point east, north, 11 rods, 5 feet to a heap of stones. Thence west, half a point north, 26 rods. It's, you know, like, what's a half a point? Oh, go back, come on. All right, well, these are half a points. You got north, northeast, and this would be a half a point. Or, I'm not sure if it's this one or the northeast is the half a point. But that was the kind of survey it did. It's amazing that it came out as well as it did when you're walking. You know, you're talking angles like that. This is a compass that's in the back there you'll be able to look at. That's got the bearings or the angles all written down there, 0 to 90, 0 to 90 there. This is an 18th century compass. This isn't from 16th century. This isn't one not as old as. This is an interesting compass. This and all this equipment was at one time in the Atwater Kent Museum. And supposedly they were donated by a John Ladd family. And John Ladd was a surveyor in Burlington and New Jersey, and he was here before Pennsylvania was here. He was in New Jersey, West Jersey and Burlington area. And supposedly by the family tradition, he was employed by William Penn and them to help lay out the city, the portraiture, the streets when they first started. And William Penn owed him 30 pounds for what he did. And William Penn said, well, you know, instead of giving you the money, I'll give you a square in the city, you know, a whole block. And Ladd took the money. And supposedly William Penn said, John, thou art a lad by name and also a lad by nature. Dost thou not perceive this will be a great city? I don't know. 30 pounds back then was how much money? And what's a square block in Center City worth today? I think he probably should have taken the land. But anyhow, in 2013, I was involved with putting together a Surveyors Historical Society meeting in Philadelphia. And I went to the Atwater Kent Museum and I showed the curator there these pictures, and they had no idea. They'd never seen it. They don't know where they're at anymore. These pictures were taken by, you know, Torben Jenk. Torben took these pictures sometime not that long ago. They were there then. So I don't know if they made the trip to Drexel when the Atwater Kent closed, but here's a picture of a brass chain, surveyor's chain, and a wooden compass. And here is a reproduction. This is not an original. This is a reproduction of wooden compass, but it shows pretty much what the kind of compasses that were being made in the colonies here. This one, I think, I bought this one it was made around 1982. So you guys want to pass this around? You can just be careful with it, that's all. It's a reproduction, it's not too much. But that's the kind of stuff that people surveyed with. Brass was very expensive. Manufacturers were few and far between. So the people who were making ships and compasses for ships were making compasses like this to sell to land surveyors. And they were being used up until the early 1900s, actually. There's a lot of them around. These are surveying chains. There's a chain and pins. And what you do with the pins is you stretch the chain out, 2 people. The rear chainman starts with 9 pins and they got 2 poles and 9 pins. The rear chainman starts out with just a pole. The head chainman starts out with the chain, 9 pins and a pole, and they stretch it out. They mark it. He drops a pin. Then they move ahead. The rear chainman picks the pin up, holds the pole where the marked pin was, and then they continue out. When the head chainman is out of pins, the rear chainman walks up, leaves the pole there, gives him the pole and the 9 pins. They've now gone 10 chain lengths. They know how long they've gone. They'll write that down or mark that somewhere, 10. And they'll continue until they get to the end of the line. And that's how they keep track of how many lines they went, how many chains they went, and the distances. And when you got to the part where it was only a portion, they counted how many links. And you wrote it down as like 15 chains, 35 links, or you wrote it as a decimal, 15.35. It's the exact same thing because there's 100 links, so 0.35 is 35 hundredths of a chain. And by doing this, they could keep track of how many times they ran out and the distances. I have 2 poles in the back there. They're recreations, but you get an idea. All right, let's talk about the portraiture. This is the first map that Thomas Holme drew that we're aware of. And this is basically downtown Philadelphia. And, you know, it's a simple design. It's nice, straight, rectangle, straight lines, supposedly at right angles to each other. He's got an even number he's got an even number of streets on either side of the main street down the middle. It's called Broad Street. I'm going to go on. Yeah, here it is. It's a little better. Here's Broad Street. There's an equal number of streets between there and the Delaware River, and an equal number between there and the Schuylkill River. The block distances here, when you use their scale, they all scale out to be 396 feet, except this one here is 496 feet, and over here there's one 496 feet, but the rest are all 396, 396, and these two on either side of Broad Street are 528 feet wide, but it's all nice and symmetrical. That's not what he built. As they were laying out, it was quite obvious they moved Broad Street to the west. It's now here. And when you look at the different early maps and all, you see distant block distances, and they shifted it. And it's like, well, why'd they do that? You know, it's all woods. What's the difference? And here, this is a very bad thing. It's hard to say, but it's profiles. It's undated, but it shows it's got the street names of Schuylkill Front and Schuylkill second, third, fourth, going towards Center City, and Delaware Front going towards Broad Street. And it's got Broad Street where it's at today. And if you notice, that's the high point of the ground. So I think he shifted it so that everything east of Broad was downhill towards the Delaware, and he put Broad Street on the high point because it was the widest street. Broad Street was 100 feet wide. Market Street was 100 feet wide. All the other streets were laid out as 50 feet wide, or half the width, with the exception of Mulberry, which became Arch, which is 66 feet. I don't know why, but that's what's laid out. That's what scales by the little pointer on his map. But this is my theory, that they shifted it to fit the slope of the ground. Might have been marshy, I don't know. So now when you lay out, the blue lines are ones that I interpolated over to portraiture. And this is a atlas from the 20s of downtown. And you see, it fits exactly what's there now. So something he designed 350 years ago still works. We still have, there's a lot of other little streets in between, but the main streets are still there. It was a great design, and it's been around for a long time. I'm a retired city surveyor. Mr. Gaddy over there knows me. We have a proud tradition that we follow in Thomas Holme's footsteps. And we've been continuously surveying in Philadelphia since the colonial era. Philadelphia is one of the few cities that controls all the surveying within the city. We have city surveyors. Not only do they do other survey work also, but they control all the stuff. Everybody's deed is tied into our city plan. And this we consider is city plan number 1. The two bigger strips in the middle, they make up what's the portraiture. Every one of them little blocks is another city plan number. There's over 300 of them now. But they define the legal street system in the city, and everybody's deed is tied into one of those streets by a distance or from the corner or from another intersecting area. Even the ones all the way down the Navy Yard, they come all the way out. To get to a point in the Navy Yard, you got to start almost at Broad and Patterson and write deeds, descriptions all the way in to get to the beginning point. It's crazy down there. But this is all tracked. Like I say, I proudly say that I was a city surveyor and I'm following Holme's footsteps. How did you buy land back then?
By putting the video on because they can see you.
Well, something well went on. I don't know why.
What?
Got to check.
You have an application. You go to the land office, the commissioners. There was 4 or 5 people that William Penn named to be his representatives. You make an application. I want to buy 100 acres. I want to buy 1,000 acres. And they'll give you a warrant, which enables you to say, all right, you're buying 100 acres in Bucks County along the Perkiomen Creek. Then you take it gets assigned to a deputy surveyor who goes out. You take your warrant to the land office. The deputy surveyor sends out people. They do the actual field work. They locate where the corners are going to be of your property, what tree is going to be the corner, what rock is going to be the corner, what's your neighbor, your adjoining property owner, because they wanted it to be continuous. They didn't want just blank pieces with wide gaps. So that was the important part about getting the surveys back, is so that they knew what had been sold, so that the new buyers weren't buying just out in the middle of nowhere. Once you had the survey, then you got what they called the returner survey, or the plan. And that was a sketch showing the shape of the property and the meets and bounds, or the description, like that one we saw from 1717 that gives you a description of where the property is. It's a unique piece. And then after you have that, you can get a patent or the deed. You record your deed. That's how you manage to acquire land. Of course, somewhere along the line, usually when you got to the survey part, you had to pay the surveyor, and a third of his fee was supposed to go to the surveyor general. And then the patent, when you record it, you had to pay somebody, and that went to the recorder's office. So there was money involved all the way. In fact, you paid, I think, when you got the warrant too. This is a photograph. It's poor, I'm sorry, but I took it with a handheld camera, and that's a framed picture on the wall in Longwood Gardens, in a house on Longwood Gardens. This is the only original survey I've ever seen until tonight. A young lady brought in one from Frankfurt that's really interesting. But this is from 1701. It's the property, and it's got the description, and it's signed by Thomas Pennington, who was the successor of Surveyor General after Thomas Holme. So, this is the property Thomas Holme owned, Pennypack Creek, or Dublin Creek. This area here is called the Swedes line, because they respected the Swedish owners of the property along the river. And after Thomas Holme died, they sold off. This is in 1766. This is 70 years after he died. His daughter died, and this is how they sold off some of his property, the upper part above the creek. This is Susquehanna Avenue here. His cemetery is right around in there. But when you take this, I took this survey, plotted these lines in AutoCAD. So I drew them out, bearings and distances, and then I overlaid them on Google Earth. Oh, I'm sorry. Here, this is a piece, 2 acres or so. He set aside money in his will. I think it was 100 pounds or a small number of pounds to use to do good for some working man's son. Well, they didn't know what to do with it. And eventually they took that money and donated this piece of ground. And this is where Lower Dublin Academy was built. Now this property is still there. This is the Swedes line. This is Willits Road. It says road here. That's Willits Road. Now it's been changed a little bit because Willits Road's been widened and whatnot. But when you lay that map from 1766 over an aerial photo from Google Earth, there's the school lot. That's still there. There's Willits Road. I think this property in here, that's pretty much the same property lines. This, you got to remember, you're taking Google Earth as a photograph of the Earth, which is round, trying to make it flat. What I try to tell people is, you want to discuss it, take a basketball, let the air out of it, cut it out, and lay it flat. Did you ever try to do that? Or a beach ball? It's all wrinkled. You can't lay a round thing flat. So that's why aerial photos and lines just don't work. But some of these property lines, there's the golf course. That's a pretty good indication that property line's still there. This one here is a pretty good indication. This Frankfurt Avenue, or Swedes line, is behind Frankfurt Avenue. There's just, I hate this. Yeah, down here, the stores and all, where PJP is. The Swedes line is behind PJP. My community, Pennypack, we are the Swedes line. Our property line behind where Pathmark used to be, Shelley's old center and all, that's the Swedes line, the back line. So they're still there. It's amazing, here we are 300 years later, and you can still see where those property lines were. Any questions? Yes. Oh, okay. Yep. I think so.
Yeah. Are the surveyor's records available to researchers in the surveyor's office?
The deeds and stuff in the survey offices are available to be viewed. To obtain copies, you got to be either the property owner or his agent. Most of the survey offices that I've worked in, the records only go back to the mid 1800s. We don't have the really old stuff. A lot of that was all collected and sent to archives up in Pennsylvania State Archives or city archives. You can go to the city archives and look stuff up, but in the actual surveyor's office, it's not quite that old. Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have two questions. Thomas Holmes, when he left the army, went to Ireland to be a surveyor. Did he have any practical lessons or experience as a surveyor?
He went to Ireland as a soldier. He was in Cromwell's cavalry, and he served from 1649 until 1656 in the army. During that time, they were doing survey work. I think he had some kind of training as a surveyor, because then when they started the down survey and the civil survey, he is documented as doing the civil survey for the county Curry, which he had to have some kind of experience to do that. Cromwell's army was mostly all Lancashire men, and to be in the cavalry, you had to have your own horse. So you had to have some money.
Okay, my second question is, in one of the slides you said Thomas came to the New World with 10 children, I think, or all his children.
5, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But in the same slide, it said Sarah stayed home in England with her husband.
Sarah Jr.
Oh.
His oldest son was Thomas Jr., who, I'm sorry, it was, his oldest son was Thomas Jr. He died when he was 17. The oldest daughter was Sarah, named after her mother. Now, they didn't call her Sarah Jr., but she's the one that was married and stayed in England with her husband. Sarah, Thomas's wife, died before he left to come here. So, and all of his children were at least teenagers by the time he came here. I think William was the youngest, and he was something like 12 years old at that time, or 13 when they came here.
Okay, we have a question from the chat, or actually it's not a question, it's a statement to start. Jim Murphy said, I believe Holmes said he could give Penn a 10,000 acre city in the Northeast, but Penn decided to go to Center City between the two rivers with a city between 1,200 and 1,300 acres. Is that?
Well, like I said, the people speculate that Thomas Holme thought about it up around Pennypack Creek area and all. That's probably where he was talking about the 10,000 acres. So.
Also, we have Denise, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her last name, Boakland. He named the land he kept for himself Springettsburg Ferry after his first wife. Part of the tract is the hill where the Philadelphia Museum of Art and Lemon Hill Mansion sit.
The Lemon Hill, maybe. The Philadelphia Museum of Art was on Fairmount, which I believe, no, it's out of Vine Street. Yeah, that could be Springersbury, yes.
This is an actual question. Tom asked, after the survey and settlement, were there a lot of land disputes?
In Ireland or here?
Here.
Here? Oh, there was people were arguing. Thomas Holme was catching a lot of grief because the Chester County deputy surveyor, Ascom, was doing surveys but not sending them to Holme. He wasn't paying Holme for them. And so Holme had no indication of what was being sold. So then he would then give warrants to new applicants, and they were being overlapped, and there was a lot of controversy that way. And in the record, you see a lot of arguments. And of course, it was complicated by the fact that William Penn was here for a couple of years, but then he went back to England. So a lot of the big decisions had to come directly from him. He didn't want to give up too much regulation. So when it came to big land decisions, it had to come directly from Holme or from Penn. So they would write a letter, put it on a boat. It would go all the way to England. Maybe took a month and a half, 2 months to get to England. Penn would get the letter. He would write an answer, put it on a boat. It would come back. So the letters were constantly crossing in the ocean, and things were being done or not being done because of the time lag of communications. But yeah, there was a lot of controversy about it.
Okay. You're getting praise. It was fascinating and down to earth, and I agree with that. I think I know more about surveying than I did when I got here. Does Holmes' original sheepskin map still exist?
Yes, it's in the Pennsylvania Archives. Now, whether you can see it or not, I don't know, but it is up in the Pennsylvania Archives in Harrisburg.
Okay. Here's a question from Mary Whibble. She says, in Delaware, my family live on roads ending in Corner Road. Would this be based on a surveying measurement?
Corner Road. It sounds like it would be a reason why you would put a name of something at corner.
Sounds like that description.
Also, you got to remember, Delaware was once Pennsylvania, part of Pennsylvania. It was the 3 lower counties. Thomas Holme also had responsibility of surveying and properties down there up until I think it officially broke away during the Revolutionary War. Up until then, it was the 3 lower counties were part of Pennsylvania. If you go out to Delaware and go along either the southern line or the western line, where there's markers, the Mason-Dixon line, one side says has Baltimore or Maryland, and the other side has a P for Pennsylvania, even though it's now Delaware. So Delaware was also part of it. But yeah, corner sounds like why not name it a street? Oh, that's down to the corner.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
Because, the whole thing was forests. So when you were going through and showing, chains, you had a picture where it was fields.
Yes.
That makes sense to me. Was the forest much more difficult to survey?
What do you think? Of course it was.
It is.
Of course it is.
But
Yeah.
so here
What you have to do is, I know there was times where they would have 3 surveyors and 5 axemen cutting the path, cutting a clearing. Now, in Philadelphia, they're trying to build houses, so they're cutting timber, they're clearing land. In fact, one of the problems that Penn had to address was people were indiscriminately cutting trees to build houses, and he wanted to reserve the best trees for himself. I mean, he owned it all. So, but yeah, it had to be cleared before it could be surveyed. But going through woods is definitely much harder.
Yeah,
That's why,
the clearing part was, I was hoping that would be
Yeah.
the answer.
that's why you'll see I have in the back for display that the chain I passed around is a half a chain, 33 feet, where the full chain back there is 66 feet. That's a full Gunther's chain or a full 4-pole chain. But they were got so tangled up in the woods and all that. Most people used the half chains, the smaller ones.
Okay, jump in. So, in Old City, before Penn got here, Dock Creek was pretty big, and there was a whole network of creeks all
Mhm.
throughout, that Old City, the eastern part of
Right.
Old City. Thomas Holme, like his map didn't really address that, right? It was just, some rectangular squares. It didn't really take into consideration the terrain.
Let me bring up a picture of the portraiture if I can. Let's see here. We'll do this. Come on, Fred, help me out here. How do I
I
get
mean,
back?
it just, he
How do I
didn't
get
seem
back
to
to the
take that
beginning?
into consideration, right?
If you
Well,
look,
there, yeah, there's
you
Dock
look
Creek,
here, you can see
Dock Creek there.
Dock Creek right here. Yep. And he did take it into consideration because he signed a number here for a property purchaser and a number here, but I don't think there's any numbers between Front Street and the creek.
But the creek actually had a number of contributing waterways
Yeah.
all throughout.
You can see some of them on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So he did incorporate them into the
if
map.
you bought a lot and the creek ran through it, you owned a lot. You owned the creek.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Any others?
We got one here and I have a follow-up.
Just curious, where was William Penn's lot in the city?
Front and Market. Right here, Front and Market. Thomas Holmes' house is shown here. My pointer dies. There's a little building in the corner there they assume is Holmes. And Thomas and William Penn was at Front and Market. South side of Market, right here. Well, it was High Street, became Market. Where the tavern was at one time, but previously it was Holmes' site. I couldn't print it because when you brought it up, it was all blurry and all, but it was actually a list of all the first purchasers corresponding to the lot numbers on this map. So as they bought their properties and were assigned a lot in the city, that list was made up and it was all old and handwritten, but I couldn't bring it in. But yeah, all these lots are numbered and you can get a list of who had what lot, the original purchasers. Now, they didn't all come here. A lot of the original purchasers bought land in England and never came over here. And then they might have hired someone to come over here to build a house for them. And then the person come over here and never built a house, or they sold the property. William Penn had a rule: if you bought land and didn't improve it and move on it within 3 years, it reverted back to him. So there's some properties that he sold 3 or 4 times, I'm sure. But, he was land poor. That's what he had, was land. He didn't have money. He had land.
Okay, we have another question, but before we get to that, just so they're going through and they're surveying, they're clearing trees so they can survey, which all makes sense. Did they leave markers to say that, this is this block, this is this
Yes,
block? So
I
that
did.
that should have diminished the arguments downtown unless they were oversold, unless they.
Well,
sold
downtown, I
multiple
don't think
times.
there's as many arguments as there were out in the countries.
True.
I have back, again, time is tough. I have copies of field work from a survey that was done in 1804. Now we're talking, 125 years after first settlement. So it's long, but they are talking about old stones that were set at the intersection of the center of Broad Street and the center of Lombard Street, and an old stone at the center of Broad Street and the center of Pine Street. And so those lines, if they're called old in 1804, when were they put
Been
in?
there.
And you got to remember also, up until after the Revolutionary War, most of downtown was vacant. there was nothing there. I mean, there was farms and swamps and woods, but the majority of the houses were from 6th or 7th Street to the river, the Delaware River, and south into Southwark and north up into the Northern Liberties. They didn't move far. The first couple of years, Thomas Holme and them, they had a wooden meeting house. They built it at Center Square, City Hall, figuring that would be the good place for the Friends meeting house for their twice a year meetings. Well, it was too far to travel. The people didn't go there. So that's why they moved the meeting houses over to 3rd and Arch and 4th and 2nd and Market or something. There was a couple of different meeting houses, but they moved up further, closer where the people were. They didn't want to go all the way out to the country.
Okay, from the chat, since Penn did not spend much time here, I guess it was Thomas Holme and James Logan representing Penn's interests. That was from Denise. And later on, Tom said James Logan as Penn's agent took good care.
Thomas Holme was one of the people who were involved. William Markham, Penn's cousin, was the lieutenant governor. He was there. There's a lot of letters back and forth between Holme and Markham and Penn. There was a number of other people that were designated as land agents. So Penn was here for short time, 1.5 years, 2 years, went back to England, and then he returned again like 4 or 5 years later. I think by the time he returned, now Thomas Holme had died in 1695. So, but yeah, his cousin William Markham was the deputy governor, and he was here for a long time. And Logan was one of the secretaries. I think there was people before him too.
And Judy, and I'm going to murder your name, Flipkowski, commented he wanted the trees for ships, and she heard that the Pekessing Creek was to be the site for the city, but the water wasn't deep enough for a port. Which
creek?
Pekessing.
Pekessing? That's quite possible. Like I said, Thomas Holme favored this area. You have the Pennypack Creek, you have Pekessing Creek, and you even have down as far as the Frankfurt Creek. But they, for whatever reason, they chose there. One of the things also, William Penn told them when they got here, he knew there was people along the river. He knew there was Swedes and Dutch settlements along the river. When they found a place for the city, and if there was anybody there, they had to either agree to move, sell the land back to Penn, and move, or they couldn't do it. And I think that was part of it, because the people that owned along the upper Delaware didn't want to sell, where the 1 or 2 that were in the center city area, they sold and moved out. And that's why he put the city where it is.
I apparently murdered a little bit Tom's comment. It was James Logan as Penn's agent took good care. And there was another one said of himself. And did Holme do the same?
No, well, he owned a lot of land. He bought and sold a lot of land, but that was the nature of his business. I don't know. There was apparently after he died, William Penn claims that Thomas Holme cheated him. I know there was one person, I think it was a Thomas Fairman, that took Holme swore he owed him 200 pounds. And this person said, okay, let's go to court. Well, he knew Thomas Holme, being a Quaker, couldn't swear an oath. So by default, he lost his 200 pounds, because as a Quaker, he wouldn't go in and swear that I'm telling the truth and only the truth.
That's downside of being a
Absolutely.
Quaker. Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate
Thank
your
you.
presentation.
Thank you. Hey, no problem.
Thank you, Jim. That was great. We are going to be celebrating, the Northeast Philadelphia History Network, Friends of Northeast Philadelphia History, the trustees of Lower Dublin Academy, and Home Circle. We'll be celebrating the 400th birthday of Thomas Holme on November 17th. He was actually born on November 1st, but we're going to be doing that at the graveyard on Holme Avenue, just above Pennypack Street, Crispin Playground, on Sunday, November 17th at 1 o'clock. We'll be sending out notification. I guess most of you all get the email So that'll be certainly coming out. Now, our next meeting here will be November 6th, first Wednesday in November, and that'll be coming from France, actually, from Paris. Agnes Troulet is a cartographer specialist, 17th century cartography, who has visited here, but she's not going to be visiting at that time. So she's going to be doing a presentation on 17th century cartography as it pertains to the Delaware Valley, and also as it pertains to the indigenous people and how they were basically erased on maps before they were erased physically. So that'll be happening November 6th, Wednesday, November 6th. Again, that announcement will go out on that. Okay.
Just very quick, I was going to also keep your schedules open for December 4th, which will be our last meeting. And Lou, who does the great job making sure that we have this connected up there, will be doing historic photos of Northeast Philadelphia. So that's the rest of the year. Also, tonight we have one of our board members from the Friends of Northeast Philadelphia History brought in a large volume of Northeast Times that are being donated to the Friends, which is really a nice thing. Something to remember as you're going through cleaning out. There's one story, which is my favorite story. Some lady had stuff that found up in the ceiling and fell down, and they were historic. So we also take donations, and we are, a nonprofit organization, so that's a good thing. So we really appreciate getting
let me expound on that a little bit.
Sure.
The Northeast Times archive basically doesn't exist. Almost all the papers were lost in a flood or discarded. So this really important source of information on Northeast Philadelphia history going back to the 30s, I think, but most of it doesn't exist. So this cache of materials is really great. But just amplifying what Maureen said, if anybody has or knows somebody that has like old editions of the Northeast Times or other local newspapers, we would love to have them for our archives because it's a big missing piece of our local history.
So try to make sure that good stuff doesn't make it to the trash. Yes.
Hello, all. I'm from the Ryers Museum, and I just wanted to make mention that they're on October 19th from 1 to 3. There'll be guest speakers, Herb and Sandy Kaufman. They're presenting The Soldier and His Lady, a look at Victorian life, culture, and fashion. You're all welcome. It's a free event.
And if you are a member of other organizations that have dates like this that we should share, please send it to us. And Fred does a great job of making sure that we keep up to date, putting the emphasis on the network part of our name, the Northeast Philadelphia History Network. And we network even out. Fred was recently at Lamont, where they had a apparently very nice event. So we try to make sure that history doesn't end at our borders. So if there's anything else in the area, let us know. We appreciate it. So with that, there's desserts. We're sorry, people who are not here in person, you don't get dessert. But everybody who's here is welcome to share and talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you.